The scent of ozone and terrified pup hit Alara before she even saw him. A tiny, shivering ball of fur that didn't realize she was the most dangerous person in these woods. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She wasn't supposed to be here. A null like her was meant to be a ghost, a shadow in the corner of the world that no one bothered to look at. But as the wind shifted, the copper tang of blood reached her nose. It was fresh, it was royal. Because of that, her blood ran cold. Without thinking, Alara dropped her basket of silver leaf herbs. The forest was too quiet, the kind of silence that usually meant a predator was watching. She pushed through a thicket of thorns, ignoring the way they clawed at her skin. What followed was a sight that made her world tilt. There, huddled beneath a rotting log, was a pup no bigger than a loaf of bread, his white fur matted with red. He wasn't shifting back. Truth be told, he looked more like a broken toy than a prince. No matter how hard she tried to turn away, her feet moved toward him. She knew the rules. Helping a shifter, especially a royal one, was a death sentence for an outcast. Yet she reached out. The moment her fingers brushed his fur, a spark of cold magic zapped her skin. The pup let out a whimper so high and broken that it shattered her resolve. She scooped him up, tucking his freezing body against her chest. She felt it, etched in fire, a connection she couldn't explain. "I've got you," she whispered. Her voice trembled. "Just stay quiet." Maybe it was fate, or maybe she was just tired of being a ghost. She knew the shadowcasters were close because the birds had stopped singing. Still, she turned and ran toward her cabin. Every snap of a twig sounded like a bone breaking. Every shadow looked like a claw. She didn't know what scared her more, the wolves behind her or the power hidden inside her. By the time she reached her porch, her lungs were burning. She burst inside and headed straight for the basement. It was a damp, dark space, but it was the only place she felt safe. In fact, her basement was the only spot in the kingdom where tracking magic failed. She laid the pup on a pile of soft blankets and began to clean his wounds. As the silence stretched, she felt a heavy weight in her chest. What followed was a roar that shook the very foundation of her house. It wasn't a normal wolf, it was a king. Alara froze, her hand hovering over the pup's matted fur. The air thickened until it felt like she was breathing lead. Above her, the heavy thud of boots vibrated through the ceiling. Torin. The name alone was enough to make the bravest warriors tremble. She felt her body move on instinct as she scrambled into the darkest corner. She had to stay invisible. Deep down, she knew the truth. Her life as a ghost was over. Before she could move, the front door of her cabin was ripped off its hinges. The sound of splintering wood echoed in the small basement. Her breath caught in her throat. She had to be the ghost everyone thought she was because if he saw her, she was dead. Still, she watched from the shadows. Soon after, the basement door creaked open. A sliver of light cut through the darkness, lighting up the dust in the air. Under the weight of his stare, even the shadows seemed to shrink. Achatarine stepped down the stairs, his massive frame blocking the only way out. He was a mountain of a man. His eyes glowed a scary gold that cut through the dark. He looked like a wolf forced into a man's skin. His scent filled the room, cedar, mountain air, and a wild, angry musk. "Where is he?" Torin growled. The sound was a physical blow to her chest. In that moment, Alara realized her null status was the only thing keeping her alive. He couldn't smell her. To his nose, she was just empty space. But even so, he stepped closer. The space between them burned as he leaned in. He was trying to find a scent that didn't exist. Her heart skipped a beat. She was so close she could see the scars on his jaw. "You're the girl from the fringe," he muttered. His voice was like dark silk. "The one they call the void." She didn't speak. She couldn't. Her thoughts spun like a top. If she told him the truth, he might take the boy and leave her to the rebels. If she lied, he might kill her right here. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted. She saw the raw, bleeding pain in his gold eyes. He wasn't just a king. He was a father who was losing his mind. "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied. Her voice was a tiny thread. Instead of hitting her, Torin grabbed her arm. His grip was like iron. The heat coming off him was like a fire. Between them, something cracked. It wasn't a bone, but the wall she had built around her heart. The moment their eyes locked, her soul answered. She didn't know why, but she felt his pain as if it were her own. Torin pushed her back, his lip curling. "You lie poorly, little ghost. My son's trail ends here. If you've hurt him, oh, I will end you." Despite that threat, Alara didn't move. She saw the way his hand shook. He was terrified. She knew that feeling because she had lived with it every day of her life. Rather than running, she stood her ground. She looked him right in the eye, even though her knees were shaking. "The woods are full of rebels, King Torin," she said. Her voice was stronger now. "Your son isn't safe out there, but he isn't safe with you either. You're too angry. You'll lead the killers right to him." Without warning, Torin lunged. He slammed his hand against the wall next to her head. The sound was like a thunderclap. Still, she didn't blink. She was a null. She had nothing left to lose. She stood there, breathing in his scent, waiting for the blow that didn't come. "You dare talk to me like that?" he hissed. "You have no wolf. You have no pack." "I have enough heart to keep a child safe." "Yeah," she snapped. As the silence roared, a small whimper came from under the blankets. Ilara's heart skipped. The secret was out. Torin froze. His head snapped toward the sound. In the span of a breath, he was across the room. He tore the blankets away. The pup let out a scared cry and tried to hide. Torin stopped. He didn't grab the boy. He didn't roar. Instead, he fell to his knees. His massive shoulders shook. He looked small. He looked human. "Leo," he whispered. But as the wind shifted, a new smell filled the house. It was the smell of rot. The Shadowcasters had found them. Not only that, but a dark mist began to crawl down the stairs. It was a magic trap. It was designed to choke a wolf's power. "They're here," Alara said. Her voice was sharp. "Ah, and they aren't here for the boy. They're here for you." She felt it then. The bond pulsed. Torin looked up at her. He was the strongest wolf in the world, but in this mist, he was weak. He looked at Alara, the girl he had just threatened to kill. He knew he couldn't fight them alone. "Protect him," the king commanded. His voice broke. "No matter what happens, save my son." Before the words left her lips, a huge gray wolf burst through the door above. Ilara grabbed the pup and ducked into the crawl space. Her wolf, the one she thought she didn't have, stirred for the first time. It felt like fire in her veins. The basement exploded. Torin shifted with a sound of snapping bones and gold light. He was huge. He was a beast of old stories. He met the first rebel in the air. Their teeth clashed like swords. Alara watched from the dark, and her hands over the pup's mouth. She could feel every hit in her own teeth. To make things worse, the mist was making Torin slow. He was fighting 3 wolves at once. He was tearing through them, but he was getting tired. Blood, red and bright, splattered against the stone walls. Ilara knew he was going to die because he was trying to protect the door where she was hiding. Close your eyes, Leo, she whispered. She saw the back door to the root cellar. It was old and stuck. If she could get it open, they could run. But she couldn't leave Torin. Without thinking, she crawled out of the hole. She grabbed a heavy iron bar from the floor. She was just a girl, but she was a knoll. The rebels didn't even see her. She moved through the mist like a ghost. As the lead rebel opened his mouth to bite Torin's neck, Ilara swung. The iron hit the wolf's head with a loud crack. He fell over, his eyes going blank. He never saw her coming. Torin used the chance to throw the other wolf off him. He looked at her with wide golden eyes. Run! She yelled. But then the air turned to ice. A tall man in black robes stepped into the room. He smelled like a grave. He was the leader of the rebels. He didn't shift. He just smiled at Ilara as if he had found a treasure. Finally, the man said, the anchor. In that moment, the truth unraveled. They weren't hunting the prince. They were using the boy to find Ilara. Her null power wasn't a curse. It was a shield that had kept her hidden from their dark magic for years. She wasn't broken. She was the only thing that could stop them. Without another word, Ilara grabbed Torin's fur. We have to go. Now. She kicked the root cellar door with all her might. It broke open. As the sky darkened, the girl, the king, and the prince ran into the woods. The forest held its breath as they vanished into the trees. She felt the mark on her soul tingle, and she let it happen. The silence of the deep woods was heavier than the mist in the basement. It felt like a thick blanket pressing against Ilara's lungs as she ran. Behind her, the heavy thud of Torin's paws tore through the leaves. It was a sound of raw power that shook the ground under her feet. She held the pup, Leo, tight against her chest. His tiny heart beat like a fast drum against her own. Her body moved on instinct because she knew these woods better than she knew herself. She followed the old paths where the stones were cold and ancient, paths that would keep them hidden. Soon after, they reached the hidden cleft. It was a narrow crack in a rock wall covered in thick green ivy. Ilara didn't wait. She squeezed through the opening and pulled the prince into the cool, dark cave. What followed was the huge, dark shape of Torin's wolf. He pushed through the gap with a low, pained groan. His black fur was wet and smelled of rain and blood. The air in the small cave got hot and thick all at once. It was filled with the heat of his big body and the wild smell of a king. Stay back, Ilara whispered. She didn't know if he could understand her as a wolf. Torin didn't move. He fell onto the sandy floor of the cave. His gold eyes were locked on her with a look that was both scary and sad. Between one breath and the next, the gold light faded from his fur. Then came the sound of bones shifting, a sound like dry sticks breaking. He groaned as his human body came back. He lay there, shaking and bleeding in the dim light. He fought for every breath because his wolf had been pushed to the limit. You led us here, Torin gasped. His voice sounded like gravel. Because you knew the magic wouldn't follow. I knew it because this rock is old, Ilara said. Her voice shook as she laid the pup on a bed of soft moss. She didn't know what scared her more, the men hunting them or the naked king at her feet. She moved toward him with a clean cloth. Still, she didn't pull away when his hand shot out. His fingers locked around her wrist. He was strong, even when he was hurt. Why help us? he hissed. He looked deep into her eyes. A knoll owes me nothing. My people have given you nothing but mean words and cold stares. Maybe it's fate, she whispered. Her heart skipped a beat as his thumb brushed her skin. Or maybe I'm just tired of watching people be hunted for things they can't change. Come morning, the cave was filled with soft gray light. The forest was quiet and cold. Alara had stayed awake all night watching the door. She listened for any sound of a broken twig or a wolf's howl. Behind her, Torin moved. He was stiff and slow as he sat up. He had wrapped a cloak around himself, but it didn't hide the deep claw marks on his shoulder. He looked like a fallen god in the shadows of the cave. The boy, Torin rasped. His eyes went straight to the sleeping prince. He's fine, Ilara said. She didn't look back at him. The curse is quiet for now because this cave is a dead zone. But he's weak, Torin. He needs a doctor, not just a hole in the ground. What's worse was the look on Torin's face. He felt guilty. He stood up, and suddenly the cave felt too small. He was so tall that his head almost touched the ceiling. He stepped toward her, and the air between them grew heavy. She felt it, etched in fire, the sheer power of him. He was a man who was used to being in charge. You say my name like we are friends, he murmured. His voice was low and dangerous. You are a ghost, Ilara, a girl who shouldn't exist. Yet you carry my son's life in your hands. I carry it because no one else would, she snapped back. She finally looked at him. Don't think I'm weak just because I'm a null. I'm the only reason you're still breathing. As the silence stretched, Torin's eyes changed. They weren't angry anymore. They were soft and full of wonder. He reached out, at his hand stopping just before it touched her face. Between them, something cracked. She saw the man behind the king. He was just a father who was scared of being alone. Deep down, she knew the truth. She was starting to care for a man who lived in a world that hated her. You are no ghost, he whispered. His breath was warm on her face. You are the only real thing I've found in this nightmare. Moments later, a loud whistle came from the woods outside. It was a signal. The shadow casters were still there. In fact, they were closer than she thought. Ilara crawled to the cave door and looked through the leaves. Not only that, but she saw the shine of silver swords in the hands of the men. They weren't just using claws now. They had weapons made to kill wolves. They're circling the cliff, Ilara whispered. Her heart beat fast in her chest. As they know we're in the rock, they just haven't found the crack yet. Torin moved behind her. He grabbed a knife he had found. I'll go out. I'll lead them away. Take Leo and run for the high pass. There's a safe place there. No, Ilara said. She turned to face him. If you go out there, they'll kill you. The magic mist is still in the air. I can smell it. You can't shift today, Torin. You're just a man. Then what do I do? He growled. He was frustrated and angry. Stay here and hide like a mouse? I am a king. I don't hide. You'll stay because I can lead them away, she said. Her voice was steady. I'm a gnoll. I have no scent. I can walk right past them and they'll never know. I'll lead them to the big gorge and then come back. Without another word, Torin grabbed her shoulders. His grip was tight and desperate. It's too risky. If they catch you, they won't, she said. Her voice broke for a second. Because I've spent my whole life being invisible. I was born for this. Between them, something cracked. It was her fear. She leaned in and let her head rest against his for a tiny second. As the silence roared, she felt the bond pulse. It was a gold light in her soul that tied her to him. She didn't know if she would see him again, but she couldn't let him die. With a single glance at the prince, she turned and vanished into the ivy. She felt it, etched in fire. The forest held its breath as the ghost stepped out to save her king. The wind shifted as Alara stepped onto the narrow ledge outside the cave. It carried the bitter smell of wood smoke and the sharp tang of silver. Her heart was a frantic bird trapped in her ribs. She moved like water because she knew the Shadowcasters were hunting for a heavy royal musk that simply didn't exist in her. Because she was a Null, she was a hole in the world. She moved with care, snapping a dry branch here and scuffing the dirt there. She was making a fake trail to lead them away from her king. Soon after, she reached the edge of the Black Gorge. The drop was hundreds of feet down into a loud, icy river. The mist from the water rose up like a ghostly wall. Still, she didn't stop. She ducked behind a huge oak tree and waited. Her breath caught in her throat as the woods exploded. 3 gray wolves burst into the clearing. Their noses were glued to the ground, but they were confused. The trail she had left was a physical one, not a scent. "She went this way," one of the shifters yelled. He shifted halfway into a man, his face looking jagged and scary. What followed was a deadly game of hide and seek. Alara watched from the shadows, her breath held until her chest ached. She was the girl who had no wolf. She was the girl who had no scent. More importantly, she was the girl who had no future. But right now, she held the lives of the royal family in her hands. The rebels ran right past her. They were fooled by the errors she had left in the dirt. She felt a cold sense of joy because her weakness was finally her greatest weapon. Meanwhile, back in the cave, the air was thick with tension. Torrin sat by his son, his big hand shaking over the boy's chest. He felt useless because his wolf was still locked away by the mist. Leo was shivering. The black veins of the curse were moving under his skin like tiny, angry snakes. The prince whimpered, on his eyes fluttering open. They were cloudy and white. He couldn't see anything. "Alara," the boy whispered. His voice was a dry, broken rasp. In the quiet that followed, Torrin felt a sharp pain in his chest. His son, who only ever felt safe with palace guards, was calling for a girl they barely knew. Maybe it was the fact that her null power was a natural sponge for the dark magic. Or maybe it was just her quiet strength. Either way, Torrin reached for the small leather baggie Lara had left behind. Inside were crushed silver leaf herbs and a bottle of clear water. "She'll be back, Leo," Torrin promised. But his voice sounded thin. Between one breath and the next, he started to put the herbs on his son's chest. He followed Alara's rules exactly. He was a king who led thousands of men, but here, and he was just a man struggling with a bowl of plants. He felt a strange warmth on his skin, where Alara had touched him. It was a spark that wouldn't go away. Deep down, he knew the truth. He wasn't just waiting for a scout. He was waiting for the woman who had become his only anchor in the storm. By the time Alara circled back to the cave, the sky was a bruised purple. She was tired. Her legs felt like they were made of lead. Still, she couldn't slow down. As she reached the ivy curtain, a hand shot out of the dark. It yanked her behind a big rock. Her scream was cut short by a hard palm over her mouth. Her soul answered before her mind did. The smell of cedar and mountain air told her it was him. It was Torrin. "Hush," he breathed into her ear. "There's one left, a tracker." The tension broke when a massive, ugly wolf stepped into the clearing. Its eyes glowed with the sick yellow light. It wasn't a rebel, it was a lone stalker. It was a scavenger that followed killers to eat the scraps. It had found the cave because of the smell of the herbs. Before the words left her lips, the wolf lunged toward the cave where the prince lay sleeping. No! Ilara cried out. Her voice broke. Without thinking, she didn't run. She didn't hide. Her instincts surged, and she threw herself between the wolf and the door. She felt a hot vibration in her hands, a pulse of power that felt like a second heartbeat. As the silence roared, the wolf hit a wall that wasn't there. It was a barrier of pure, silent power. It rippled through the air like heat over a road. The wolf yelped. Its fur burned as it was tossed backward by her nothingness. Torin watched from the dark. His eyes were wide with fear and awe. He saw it then. The truth unraveled. Alara wasn't a gnoll because she was weak. She was a gnoll because her power was the opposite of a wolf's. She didn't create power, she stopped it. She was the only thing in the world that could truly stop a shifter. What what did you do? Torin whispered. Alara looked at her hands. They were glowing with a soft silver light. Her thoughts spun. She had spent her life feeling like a hole in the world. But in a single heartbeat, the world shifted. She wasn't a ghost anymore. She was a weapon. The silver glow on Alara's palms hadn't even faded before the forest erupted with the sound of 100 snapping branches. Her heart skipped a beat because this wasn't the quiet creep of a rebel. It was the heavy, loud march of a real army. Upper high-ranking wolves were everywhere. Moments later, the clearing was flooded with warriors in leather and fur. Their eyes glowed with the fierce loyalty of the King's Guard. At their head stood High Priest Malachor. His white robes looked bright and clean against the blood-soaked dirt of the fringe. "My king!" Malachor cried out. His voice was smooth and sweet like honey over a sharp blade. "We followed the trail of the dark magic. Thank the great wolf you are safe." What followed was a sharp, scary tightening in Alara's chest. While Torin stepped forward, his face full of relief, Alara felt like she was going to be sick. Because she was a gnoll, she didn't see the priest's holy light. Instead, she felt the empty hole behind it. She felt a cold, oily vibration coming from Malachor. It was the same smell of rot she had smelled in the poison mist back at her cabin. Still, she stayed in the shadows. Her body moved on instinct to stay between the rescuers and the prince. "Malachor," Torin rasped. He put his hand on the priest's shoulder. "The boy, he's in the cave. The Knoll girl saved him. She is the reason he still breathes." Under the weight of his stare, Ilara felt Malachor's eyes strip her bare. It wasn't a look of respect. It was the hungry look of a hunter finding a prize. He didn't see a girl, he didn't see a person, and he didn't see a soul. He only saw a tool he could use. Deep down, she knew the truth. The rebels hadn't been working alone. They were just the dogs, but Malachor was the master. The air thickened with a new kind of danger. It smelled of old incense and a dirty lie. Inside the cave, the tension broke when Malachor said he had to bless the prince to heal the curse. Alara watched from the corner. Her thoughts spun like a top. She saw the way the priest's fingers stayed too long on the boy's neck. His eyes kept darting back to her glowing hands. To make things worse, Torin were busy talking to his soldiers. He was a king again. In his world, priests were holy and good. He didn't see the rot. "The curse is very deep," Malachor murmured. His voice echoed in the small cave. "It needs a sacrifice of pure, silent blood to make the soul steady." It needs the blood of an Aegis. What followed was a silence so heavy it felt like a mountain. Torin froze. His head snapped toward the priest. An Aegis? They all died 1,000 years ago, Malachor. There are only gnolls left now. They are broken wolves. No, Malachor said, and he turned a slow, mean smile toward Ilara. A gnoll is just an Aegis who hasn't been cut yet. In fact, her blood is the only thing that can power the ritual I have made for the prince and for the throne. Between one breath and the next, the world shifted. Alara realized the rescue was a trap. Malachor didn't want to save the prince. He wanted to use Alara's rare blood to make a magic wall over the whole kingdom. He wanted to make every wolf a slave to his power. She saw the truth dawn on Torin's face. But before he could shift, Malachor pulled a silver bottle from his robes. He smashed it on the ground. A cloud of thick black gas filled the cave. Torin fell to his knees. His wolf was trapped in a cage of silver pain. Run! Torin roared. The word tore out of his throat as he fought the poison. Alara didn't wait. She grabbed Leo, Eileen, who was crying now. She ran toward the back of the cave. Her heart ached as she saw the guards, men she thought were heroes, pointing their spears at their own king. Malachor laughed. It was a sound like dry leaves moving over a grave. He didn't care about the king anymore because he had the real prize. He had the girl whose blood could silence the world. Grab her, Malachor yelled. The boy is a bonus, but the girl is the key. She felt it then. The forest held its breath as a lush jumped into the small hole behind the root cellar door. She wasn't just running for her life anymore. She was running because the future of every shifter lived in her veins. The space between her and the guards burned with the heat of the chase. She burst out into the night. The cold air hit her face like a slap. She was alone again. Behind her, the cave echoed with Torin's screams of anger. She stopped for a split second. Her soul answered his cry with a howl of its own. She couldn't leave him, yet she couldn't stay. To make things worse, the Shadowcaster rebels were coming out of the trees. They were shaking hands with the royal guard. They were the same army. The betrayal was complete. I'll come back for you, she whispered into the wind. Her voice was a promise etched in fire. By the time the guards reached the exit, she was gone. She turned and vanished into the deepest part of the Black Gorge. She was a gnoll. She was a ghost. She was a weapon. More importantly, she was the only hope the Alpha King had left. The roar of the Black Gorge was a loud wall of sound that swallowed Alara's heavy sobs. She scrambled down the slippery rocks of the deep hole. Her fingers were raw and bleeding as she held the prince. Behind her, the torches of Malachor's men looked like angry orange eyes in the mist. She moved faster because she knew the guards were slowing down. They were afraid of the dark water. But Alara had nothing left to fear. Her world had tilted. The only thing that felt real was the cold weight of the child and the memory of Torin's screams. Soon after, she reached the very bottom of the gorge. The water turned into a quiet, black pool. In the center of the clearing stood a massive stone table covered in silver moss. It wasn't just a rock. It was the altar of the Aegis. As the silence stretched, Ilara felt a low hum in her bones. It was a song that her blood seemed to remember from long ago. She laid the shivering prince on the moss. In that moment, she knew she had to make a choice that would change her forever. I have to do this, Leo, she whispered. Her voice was a dry rasp. I have to do this because if I don't, your father is never coming home. She looked at herself in the dark water. She was the girl who had no wolf. She was the girl who had no pack. More importantly, she was the girl who had no choice. To make things worse, she could hear the clank of silver chains from the ridge above. Torin was being taken away. He was being hauled in a cage of silver. His power was gone because of the man he had trusted. Deep down, she knew the truth. She had to pay the price to wake the silent blood in her veins. She picked up a sharp black stone from the altar's edge. The moment the stone cut her palm, the world stood still. Elara didn't scream. She watched as her silver blood fell onto the moss. It didn't soak in. Instead, it began to glow like liquid stars. What followed was a change that felt like fire blooming under her skin. It wasn't the bone-breaking shift of a wolf, but it hurt just as much. Her null emptiness was being filled with a roar of pure, cold power. It made the very air shake around her. Is this what I am? She gasped. Her thoughts spun. Still, the altar wanted more. She felt the power pulling at her memories. It was trying to take the soft parts of her heart in exchange for the strength to kill. She saw her mother's face. She smelled her old cabin. Because she was scared of losing herself, she fought back. She anchored her mind to the image of Torin's golden eyes. She wouldn't let the power take her love. Rather than giving in, she pushed the energy into the prince. She used her own life force to shield his heart from the curse. Meanwhile, the first of the royal guards reached the bottom of the gorge. They stopped dead. They didn't see a helpless null girl anymore. They saw a woman surrounded by a storm of silver light. It pushed back the shadows of the forest. To make things worse, their own wolves began to whimper and hide. They felt it, etched in fire, a power that could turn their strength into nothing. Alara stood up. Her hair whipped around her face like a halo of smoke. "Stay back!" Alara's voice roared. It echoed with the power of 100 ghosts. The lead guard took a step forward. He was the man who had laughed at her in the basement. But then he fell to his knees. His wolf was being silenced by her presence. Not only that, but his silver spear turned to dust in his hands. Alara felt her instincts surge. She had a predatory focus now. The world narrowed down to one thing: Torin. She was no longer a ghost hiding in the fringe. She was the anchor. The kingdom was hers to protect. "Where is he?" she demanded. Her voice didn't shake anymore. They are taking him to the capital," the guard shakingly said. "Malachor wants to kill the king before the sun comes up. He says a new age is coming." What followed was a cold, hard feeling in Alara's chest. She looked at the prince. His skin was finally turning pink and healthy. She had saved the boy, but the king was still in chains. Between one breath and the next, she made a vow that shook the trees. She would walk into the heart of the city. She would tear down the silver cages. And she would show Malachor that the null he had hunted was the one who would end him. She felt it, etched in fire. The bond pulsed harder than ever. Torin was miles away, but she could feel his heartbeat in her own blood. He was fighting for her. She would fight for him. Without another word, she picked up the prince and began to climb. She wasn't running away this time. She was coming for her throne. Before the words left her lips, she felt her soul answer the call. She was the ghost who had found her voice. The city of Argentus looked like a jagged crown of white stone and cold iron under the pale sky. Ilara walked toward the main gates. She wore a merchant's old, torn cloak to hide her face. The prince was hidden in a basket of purple flowers. Her heart sank because the air didn't smell like sadness. It smelled of roasted meat and sweet wine. People were cheering in the streets. They acted like a great war had been won. What followed was a scary thought. Malachor hadn't just taken the throne. He had stolen the people's minds with his lies. Soon after she reached the center of the city, a huge wooden stage had been built there. It was covered in the white silk of the high priest. Still, there was no sign of Torin. She moved through the crowd. Her null status kept her invisible to the guards, but she felt her new power flickering like a dying candle. Because the city was built on rocks that drink magic, her energy was being pulled out of her body. It was a trap she hadn't seen coming. She was becoming a ghost again, but this time it was being done to her by force. "He's in the iron deep," a voice whispered near her ear. Alara spun around. Her hand reached for her hidden knife. It was a young maid with red, crying eyes. The girl knew the prince's scent even through the flowers. What's worse was the news she told Alara. Malachor had fed Torin a poison that rotted the wolf from the inside out. By the time the moon was high, the king would be gone. Alara felt her world tilt. She was losing her power. Her king was dying. And she was all alone in a city that was dancing on his grave. The walk down into the Iron Deep was a journey into a nightmare. It was made of wet stone and the smell of old blood. Alara slipped past the sleeping guards. Her body moved on instinct as she moved through the maze of tunnels under the palace. Every step felt heavier than the last. The rocks in the walls were screaming at her blood, and they wanted to drink the silver light from her veins. No matter how hard she tried to hold on, she felt herself growing weak. She was a girl who had no power. She was a girl who had no light. More importantly, she was a girl who had no hope. In that moment, she found the middle cell. It was a cage of solid silver. It glowed with a sick green light. Inside, Torin was slumped against the bars. He looked half dead. His gold eyes were dim and foggy. His skin looked like gray ash. The poison was working fast. He didn't even look up when she pressed her face against the cold bars. The silver burned her skin like a hot fire, but she didn't care. The space between them smelled of death and old stone. "Torin," she choked out. Her voice was a broken whisper. The king's head rolled toward her. He didn't roar. He didn't snarl. Instead, he reached out a shaking hand. His fingers barely touched her hair. "Run, Alara," he rasped. "There is no cure. Malachor won. Save my son." Deep down, she knew the truth. The only way to save him was to give him her own life. But the rocks in the walls were already taking everything she had. To make things worse, she heard the loud thud of Malachor's boots on the stairs. He had been waiting for her. He had lured her here to watch the last spark of her family line die in a hole in the ground. Malachor stepped into the light. His smile was wider than it had ever been. He didn't bring any guards because he didn't need them. The city itself was his weapon. He watched as Alara fell to her knees. Her silver glow was turning into a dull gray. She felt the prince cry in her arms. Between them, something cracked. Not the bars, but Alara's spirit. She had climbed out of the dark gorge and fought monsters, only to be drained dry in a silver cage. "You thought you were a hero." Malachor laughed. The sound was like glass breaking in her ears. "You are just a battery, little girl, and your king is just a corpse." What followed was the most painful moment of her life. Malachor reached through the bars. He grabbed Torin's chin and forced the king to watch. He raised a silver knife to Alara's throat. She was too weak to fight back. Her bones remembered the cold of the woods. Her soul felt like it was being blown out like a candle. She looked at Torin one last time. His eyes were full of a silent, screaming apology. He was watching her die because he couldn't save her. "Goodbye, little ghost," Malachor hissed. As the silence roared, Alara felt the last of her power leave her, and the silver light was gone. The cold took over her body. She felt her heart slowing down to match the dying beat of the king behind the bars. The goal seemed impossible now. The king was poisoned, the prince was trapped, and the anchor was empty. She closed her eyes and let the darkness take her. In the quiet that followed, she felt a single tear roll down her cheek. She felt it, etched in fire, the end of the world. The forest didn't hold its breath this time. It let out a long, final sigh. The Null was finally what everyone said she was. Nothing. The cold edge of Malachor's silver knife pressed against Alara's skin. But she was too empty to care. Her heartbeat was a slow, dying sound. Malachor's face was twisted in a mean grin. He thought he had won. Yet he had forgotten one thing: the child. Naleo felt the darkness coming and reached out from his basket. His tiny, warm hand touched the back of Ilara's neck. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted. The null hole inside her didn't stay empty. It screamed. Because of the prince's royal blood, a secret blood call snapped into place. It was a magic link made for the Aegis to save the king. What followed was a sudden, scary change in the city's power. Instead of the rocks drinking her dry, Ilara became a vacuum. She began to suck the stolen magic out of the very walls of the Iron Deep. The silver light didn't just come back, it exploded. It pulsed out of her skin in waves of bright white. As the silence roared, Malachor was thrown backward. His knife hit the stone floor with a loud clang. Alara stood up. Her eyes were no longer brown, they were a bright, burning silver. "The boy," she whispered. Her voice sounded like 100 voices at once. "He is the spark." She felt it, etched in fire. The climb back from the dark had begun. She wasn't just a girl, she wasn't just a null. More importantly, she wasn't just a ghost. She was a living bridge for every bit of magic Malachor had stolen from his people. Still, she didn't look at the scared priest. Her eyes went straight to the silver cage where Torin lay dying. She didn't know if she had enough time, but she knew she had the power because the city's magic was now her own. Alara stepped toward the silver bars. The metal began to moan and twist. She didn't need a key because her power was the only key she needed. With a single look, the silver bars turned to liquid. They dripped onto the floor like hot tears. She knelt beside Torin. She ignored the way the poison tried to jump from his skin to hers. To make things worse, the poison was like thick, black oil in his veins. It was choking his wolf. "I have you," she murmured. Her voice was steady and strong. Without thinking, she pressed her glowing hands against his chest. She didn't try to pull the poison out. Instead, she used her power to silence it. She forced the rot into a deep sleep. She tied Torin's soul to her own. Between one breath and the next, his golden eyes snapped open. They were no longer dim. They were roaring with a fire that matched her own. The bond pulsed between them. It was a golden bridge that carried her strength into his broken body. "Ilara!" Torin rasped. His hand came up to touch her face. "Stay with me," she commanded. "Now we have a city to take back." What's worse for Malachor was that he could see the change. He ran toward the stairs. He was screaming for his guards, but the guards were no longer coming because they could feel the shift in the air. The null had become the sun. They were all just shadows now. Alara helped Torin to his feet. He was still weak, but he was standing. More importantly, he was an alpha again. By the time they reached the palace stairs, the moon was high. Alara carried the prince in one arm. She helped the king with the other. They burst through the heavy doors onto the high balcony. They looked out over the city square. The music stopped. The dancing ended. Thousands of wolves looked up to see their dead king standing beside a woman who looked like she was made of stars. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted, and the lies Malachor had told began to fall apart like dry sand. People of Argentus, Alara's voice rang out. Her power made it loud and clear. Your king is not a corpse, and I am not a ghost. Beside her, Torin let out a roar that shook the glass in the windows. It was a roar of a man taking back his home. Not only that, but the prince let out a small howl of his own. The crowd fell to their knees. They didn't do it because they were scared. They did it because they knew the anchor was back. The space between the people and their rulers was finally closed. Grab the priest, Torin yelled. His voice was like thunder. Malachor tried to run, but the people he had lied to were already closing in. Still, Ilara didn't watch him. She looked at Torin. For the first time, she didn't feel like an outcast. She felt like she was exactly where she belonged. She had made the final plan. She had gathered her strength. Now it was time for the final fight. Before the words left her lips, she felt the bond settle into a deep hum. The end was here. The air on the balcony didn't just shake. It broke into pieces. Malachor was cornered by his own guards. He let out a sound that wasn't a man or a wolf. It was a scream of pure, dark magic. Because he knew he couldn't win with lies, he chose to burn the world down. His body began to grow and twist. His white robes tore as he turned into a scary shadow wolf. It was a monster of smoke and bone that shouldn't exist. As the silence roared, the monster jumped at Alara. Its claws were dripping with the same black rot that had almost killed Torin. What followed was the final test of the Aegis. Alara didn't reach for a sword. She didn't try to shift into a wolf. Instead, she stepped forward and opened her arms. Her body moved on instinct. She drew the silver light from the city's rocks and sent it into one bright point. Between one breath and the next, she hit the floor with her hand. A wave of white light moved out. It slammed into the shadow wolf. The monster's roar stopped fast because Alara's power didn't just hit him. It took his magic away forever. You are nothing, Alara's voice boomed. It sounded like 1,000 ghosts speaking at once. The shadow wolf began to shrink. The smoke fell away to show a small, weak man. Still, the beast made one last snap at her throat. Before it could reach her, a blur of black fur jumped in the way. Torin had shifted. His wolf was a mountain of muscle and anger. Now, with a single snap of his teeth, Malachor was gone. The big question was answered. Ilara's worth wasn't in a wolf. It was in the peace she brought to the world. In the quiet that followed, the only sound was the king's heavy breathing. Torin shifted back. His skin was wet with sweat and the last of the poison. He didn't look at the crowd. He walked straight to Alara. His gold eyes were wide with love and joy. She felt it, etched in fire. The bond was beating with a steady, healthy rhythm. She was tired. Her bones ached from the magic. But as Torin pulled her close, the pain started to go away. It's over, he whispered into her hair. His voice was thick and shaky. What followed was the savin of the city's heart. The guards woke up as if from a bad dream. They began to help the hurt people. Oh, they cleaned the palace of the priest's dark signs. Alara reached into her basket and pulled out Leo. The prince wasn't cold anymore. He was a warm, wiggly pup. He licked his father's face right away. Because of Alara's sacrifice at the old stone table, the curse was gone. The boy was just a boy again. You saved us, Ilara, Torin said. He looked at the people who were now yelling her name. Not just my son, not just me. You saved the soul of our home. Still, Alara felt a little sad for the ghost she used to be. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer safe in the dark. But as she looked at the man she loved and the child she had saved, she knew the truth. Being seen was a small price to pay for being home. The change was complete. She had started as a hole in the world. Now she was the anchor that held it together. That night, and the palace smelled of pine and fresh rain. The smell of rot was gone. Alara stood on the balcony where she had first seen the crowd, but this time she wasn't alone. Torrin stood beside her. His hand was on her back. She wore a dress of silver silk that matched the light in her eyes. The city below was quiet. The lights of the houses looked like stars on the ground. It was a new normal. It was a peace they had earned with blood and love. The council wants to give you a big title, Torrin murmured. His breath was warm on her ear. But I have a better one in mind. In the stillness that followed, he dropped to one knee. He didn't do it as a king. He did it as a man asking for a partner. The space between them burned with a heat that was purely human. Alara felt her soul answer before the words even left her lips. She wasn't just the king's mate. She was the queen the wolves had forgotten they needed. The Knoll girl had become the queen of the silent. I will stay, she said. Her voice was clear and sure. As long as I am by your side. Final scene. Impression: the moon was high. It cast a silver light over the land that seemed to hum with Ilara's blood. The forest was no longer a place to hide. It was a place to belong. As Torrin stood up and kissed her, the bond settled into a permanent, glowing hum. The story ended with the quiet, powerful beat of a heart that refused to turn away. 1 year later, the Fringe was a different place. Alara's old cabin was now a school. It was for those born without a wolf. It was a place where they could learn that being quiet was a gift, not a curse. Under the moonlight, a tiny white wolf and a gold pup played in the grass. Alara watched them from the porch. She felt a warm, heavy weight behind her. Torrin's arms wrapped around her. His chin rested on her shoulder. They were the alpha and the anchor. Their world was finally whole.